The sky was on fire. Not the kind of fire that comes from a storm or a burning building. This was something older, something alive. The kind of fire that made the air shake and made the ground beneath your boots feel like it was about to crack open and swallow everything whole. Ethan Cole wiped the grease off his hands with a torn cloth and looked up from the broken engine he had been fixing for the last 3 hours. He was a mechanic. That was all he was. A 32-year-old man with calloused hands, a faded brown jacket, and a job that nobody in this new world thought was important anymore. But Ethan knew better. In a world where machines kept people alive, the man who fixed the machines was the most important man in the room. He just never got credit for it. The settlement of Duskwall was not a beautiful place. It was built from metal scraps, old wood, and whatever the survivors could drag in from the ruins of the old cities. About 400 people lived there. Farmers, traders, fighters, healers. All of them trying to survive in a world that had changed completely 40 years ago. When the rift opened in the sky and everything humanity thought it knew about the universe turned out to be wrong. The rift had brought the dragons. Not the dragons from old stories, not the fairy tale kind with gold coins and sleeping princesses. These dragons were real. They were massive. They were intelligent. And they did not care about humans at all. To the dragons, humans were small, weak, and irrelevant. They flew where they wanted. They burned what they wanted. And if a human settlement happened to be in their path, that was simply not the dragon's problem. Most humans learned to stay out of dragon territory. Ethan had spent his whole life doing exactly that. But today, something was different. He heard it before he saw it. A deep, rolling thunder coming from the North Ridge, followed by a wave of heat so strong it pushed against his chest like a wall. He dropped the cloth in his hand and stepped out from under the vehicle he had been working on. Around him, people in the settlement were already running. Mothers grabbing children, fighters reaching for weapons. The alarm bell on the watchtower started ringing, loud and fast, the kind of ringing that meant one thing: dragons. Close. Ethan looked toward the North Ridge and felt his stomach drop. There were 3 of them, massive, dark-scaled dragons circling in the sky above the ridgeline, their wings spreading wide enough to block out the sun for a second every time they passed. They were not landing. They were not attacking. They were watching, and somehow that was worse. But that was not what stopped Ethan Cold. What stopped him was the fire on the ground. At the base of the North Ridge, maybe 300 meters from the outer wall of the settlement, there was a burning mound. It was surrounded by a circle of dragonfire, deep amber and gold, burning in a perfect ring about 15 feet wide. No natural fire burned like that. No human fire held a perfect circle. That was dragonfire, controlled and deliberate, placed there by something that knew exactly what it was doing. And from inside that ring of fire, Ethan could hear something. A sound so small it barely reached him over the noise of the alarm bell and the wind and the distant thunder of dragon wings. It was crying. Not human crying, not an animal sound he recognized. It was high and sharp and desperate, like something very small was in a great deal of pain and had been crying for a long time already and was starting to lose the strength to keep going. Ethan started walking before he made the decision to walk. His boots moved across the dirt ground of the settlement, past the running people, past the fighters taking positions on the wall, past the healer woman who grabbed his arm and told him to get inside. He pulled his arm free and kept walking. Sergeant Voss, the head of the settlement's defense unit, stepped directly in front of him at the gate. Voss was a big man, wide shoulders, short gray hair, a scar running from his left ear down to his jaw. He had survived more dragon encounters than anyone in Duskwall, and he had one rule that he enforced above everything else. You do not go near Dragonfire. Ever. For any reason. Cole. Voss said his name like a warning. Turn around. Something's in that fire, Ethan said. I know. Voss did not move. It's not our problem. It's crying. Cole. Something alive is in that fire, and it's crying, and nobody is doing anything. Ethan looked at the man directly. So I'm going to go look. Voss stepped closer. Those 3 dragons up there are watching that fire. You go near it, they will burn you where you stand. They will burn this entire settlement. You understand what I'm telling you? 400 people, Cole. 400 people live inside this wall. Ethan heard him. He understood every word. He stood there for a moment and looked back at the ring of fire 300 meters away. The crying had gotten weaker. Whatever was inside that fire had been in there for a while already. He looked back at Voss. Then tell everyone to get to the underground shelter, he said, because I'm going. He moved around the man before Voss could respond. He heard Voss behind him shouting at people to move to the shelters. He heard the alarm bells still ringing. He heard the heavy beat of dragon wings somewhere above him, getting lower. He did not stop walking. The heat hit him first. Even from 50 meters away, the Dragonfire pushed heat against his face and arms like standing in front of an open furnace. His eyes watered. The air tasted like ash and something electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. He kept walking. At 20 meters, he could see inside the ring more clearly now. The fire was dense and the smoke was thick, but in the center of the circle, curled on the scorched ground, was something small and blue. Vivid, electric blue, the color of deep ocean water on a clear day. Too small to be an adult dragon, too small even to be a young one. It was a hatchling, a baby dragon, alone in the center of a ring of fire, wings tucked tight against its tiny body, head low, crying in short, weak bursts that were getting quieter by the second. Ethan stopped walking. He stood there at the edge of the fire ring and felt the heat pressing against his entire body and looked down at this tiny creature that should not have been alone and should not have been afraid and should not have been slowly dying inside a ring of fire while the world watched from a safe distance. He looked up at the three massive dragons circling silently overhead. He looked back down at the hatchling. Then Ethan Cole, a mechanic with no magic and no wings and no armor, took one breath, lowered his head, and stepped into the Dragonfire. The fire did not kill him. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. He had expected pain. He had expected the kind of burning that ends a person in seconds, the kind of heat that turns everything to nothing before the mind even has time to understand what is happening. He had stepped into that fire fully prepared to die. He had made that choice with both eyes open, but the fire did not kill him. It hurt. He was not going to pretend it did not hurt. The moment he crossed the edge of the ring, the heat wrapped around him like a living thing, pressing against his skin, pushing into his lungs with every breath, making his eyes burn and his ears ring. His jacket started to smoke along the sleeves. The metal buttons on his chest turned hot enough that he could feel them through the fabric. His boots felt like they were sitting on a stovetop. But his skin did not blister. His hair did not catch. His body did not collapse. He kept moving forward. The smoke inside the ring was thick and heavy, gray and gold swirling together in slow currents that moved against the wind like they had their own direction to follow. Every step he took, the ground beneath him was black and cracked. The dirt burned down to something harder underneath. The light inside the ring was different from outside. Warmer. More golden, like standing inside a lantern. He saw the hatchling clearly now. It was small, smaller than he expected up close, maybe the size of a large house cat, curled tight on the burned ground with its tail wrapped around its own body like it was trying to make itself as small as possible. Its scales were vivid blue, the kind of blue that almost seemed to glow from the inside, though Ethan could not tell if that was real or just a trick of the firelight. Its wings were folded flat and tight against its back. Its small head was pressed down low against the ground. It was still crying. Weak, short sounds now, less energy behind each one. Ethan crossed the last few meters and dropped to one knee in front of it. Up close, the hatchling looked wrong in a way that made his chest tighten. One of its back legs was bent at a bad angle. Not broken completely, but clearly injured, the kind of injury that came from a fall or a hard impact. There were scorch marks along one side of its body where its own scales had been burned, which meant something had pushed fire against it from outside the ring, not inside. Someone had not started this fire to keep the hatchling warm. Someone had started this fire to keep other things out, or to mark a territory. Ethan filed that thought away for later. Right now, the hatchling needed his attention. He reached out slowly, the way he would reach toward any injured animal, keeping his hand low and open, not grabbing, just offering. His fingers were shaking slightly from the heat and from something else he did not want to name. The hatchling's eyes opened. They were extraordinary eyes, large and deep, the color of clear ocean water, with a vertical pupil that caught the firelight and split it into something almost like a star pattern. For one long second, the hatchling stared at his hand, and Ethan stared back at those eyes, and the entire world outside the fire ring stopped existing completely. Then, the hatchling made a different sound. Not crying. Something quieter. A low, soft sound from deep in its small throat, like a question being asked in a language Ethan had never heard, but somehow understood anyway. He moved his hand closer. The hatchling lifted its head. Slowly. With effort. Its injured leg shifted, and it made a sharp sound of pain, and Ethan instinctively moved forward and slid both hands gently under its body, cradling it the way he would hold something that he was afraid of breaking. The hatchling tensed for 1 second, every small muscle going rigid, and Ethan held perfectly still and kept his breathing slow and kept his hands steady and waited. The tension left it all at once. The hatchling settled into his hands like it had simply decided he was safe. Its head came to rest against his forearm. Its small body was warm against his palms, not the burning kind of warm, but something deeper, something that seemed to move through his hands and up into his arms like a current running through water. Its crying stopped completely. The silence that followed was enormous. Ethan became aware of several things at the same time. The fire around the ring had gone lower. Not out, but lower. The wall of flame that had been chest height when he entered was now knee height and dropping slowly, pulling back toward the ground like a tide going out. The smoke was clearing. The golden light inside the ring was changing, getting cooler, shifting from amber to something softer and silver, and the ground was vibrating, not shaking, not an earthquake, a deep, rhythmic vibration that he felt through his boots and his knees and the bones of his legs, a heartbeat rhythm, too slow to be human, too powerful to be anything small. He looked up. The 3 dragons were no longer circling. They were landing. The first one came down on the north ridge above the fire ring, its massive body settling onto the rock with a sound like a controlled avalanche, wings folding back in slow and deliberate movements. It was dark-scaled, almost black, with deep red markings along its neck and jaw that looked like old scars or old writing. Ethan could not tell which. Its eyes were fixed directly on him. 2 burning amber lamps in a dark face the size of a small building. The second one landed to his left. Closer. Maybe 50 meters. Its scales were deep gray, and it was slightly smaller than the first, but its presence felt heavier somehow, like the air around it had more weight than normal air should have. It lowered its head slowly when it landed, and Ethan got the very clear impression that it was looking specifically at what he was holding in his hands. The third one did not land on the ridge or on the flat ground. It landed directly in front of him. The impact of it hitting the earth threw a shockwave of dust and heat outward in every direction. The remaining fire rings scattered and died. Ethan felt the force of it in his chest like a struck bell. He did not move back. He did not put the hatchling down. He stayed exactly where he was, on one knee, cradling the tiny blue dragon against his chest with both arms, and looked up at the creature in front of him. This dragon was different from the other 2. Older, larger. Its scales were the color of dark bronze, and they carried a texture like carved stone, deep and layered and ancient. Its eyes were gold, not orange gold or fire gold. Pure, cold, ancient gold, the kind of color that existed before humans had words for colors. Those gold eyes looked at Ethan for a long time. Then, the dragon opened its mouth, and the sound that came out was not a roar. It was a single word. Ethan did not understand the language, but he understood the tone. And the tone was not anger. It was not a threat. It was something he had not expected to hear from a creature that could reduce him to ash in less than a second. It was a question. Ethan did not speak dragon. Nobody in Duskwall did. Nobody in any settlement he had ever visited or heard about did either. Humans and dragons had existed in the same world for 40 years, and in all that time, the two species had never once sat down and had a conversation. Dragons did not come to humans. Dragons did not lower themselves to the level of creatures they considered beneath notice. The relationship between the two species was simple and had never changed. Dragons flew where they wanted. Humans stayed out of the way. That was the entire agreement. So when the ancient bronze dragon in front of him spoke a single word in a language Ethan had never heard, he had no idea what it said. But he answered anyway. "She's hurt." He said it quietly, keeping his voice steady, nodding down toward the hatchling in his arms. "Her back leg. I think she fell. She needs someone to look at that injury before it gets worse." The dragon did not move. Its gold eyes stayed fixed on his face. Ethan kept going because stopping felt more dangerous than talking. "I'm a mechanic. I fix things. I'm not a healer, but I know enough to know that leg needs to be set properly, or it won't heal right. She needs clean water. She needs to be kept warm, but not with open fire. Not against burned skin." He looked down at the hatchling for a second and then back up. "I can help with that, if you let me." The silence that followed was the longest silence of his life. The two dragons on the ridge had not moved. The gray one to his left had taken 2 slow steps closer during the time Ethan had been talking, and was now close enough that he could see the individual scales along its jaw and the way its nostrils flared slightly with each breath. Tasting the air, reading something in it that Ethan could not see or measure. The dark one on the ridge above had its head angled low, watching the Bronze Elder with an attention that looked almost like waiting for a signal. The Bronze Elder took 1 step forward. The ground moved with it, not dramatically. Just a single deep shudder that ran through the dirt and up through Ethan's knee and into his spine. The dragon's head came down slowly, lowering on that long neck until its face was maybe 4 feet from Ethan's own face. This close, the heat coming off its body was significant, not painful, but constant, like standing near a forge that had been burning all day. Its breath, when it exhaled slowly through those massive nostrils, smelled like hot stone and something sharp and clean, like air before a lightning storm. Its gold eyes moved from Ethan's face down to the hatchling. The hatchling, still cradled against Ethan's chest, made the quiet low sound again. The same sound it had made before, that question tone that had no human word attached to it. And something happened then that Ethan was not prepared for. The Bronze Elder made a sound back. Soft, almost gentle. A deep resonant sound that came from somewhere in its chest and traveled through the air and through the ground simultaneously, like a sound that existed in 2 places at once. The hatchling's small body relaxed completely. Whatever had just passed between them, it had been a conversation, short and quiet and in a language made of sounds Ethan could not reproduce, but a conversation, and after it ended, the Bronze Elder lifted its eyes back to Ethan's face, and this time, something in those ancient gold eyes had shifted. Ethan could not name the shift. He had no reference for reading a dragon's expression, but something had changed in the way those eyes looked at him. The cold evaluation was still there, but something had been added to it, something that felt almost like consideration. The Elder stepped back. Then it turned its head toward the gray dragon on the left and made a short, sharp sound, a single syllable, delivered with a flatness that carried the weight of an order. The gray dragon dipped its head once and moved, not toward Ethan, away from him, back toward the ridge at a pace that was unhurried but deliberate, like something being handled. Then the Elder turned back to Ethan and lowered its head again. This time it extended 1 foreleg forward, slowly, and opened its massive clawed foot on the ground in front of him. The claws were each longer than Ethan was tall, but the gesture itself was not threatening. It was the gesture of something making space, offering a direction. Ethan looked at the open claw, at the direction it pointed. Up toward the north ridge, away from the settlement, toward the high ground where the dragons had first appeared. He understood. It was asking him to follow. He stood up from his knee, still holding the hatchling carefully against his chest, and looked back toward the settlement for the first time since he had entered the fire ring. From here, he could see the outer wall and a watchtower and a bell that had gone quiet now. He could see the shapes of people on the wall, tiny at this distance, watching. He could not see their faces, but he could imagine what those faces looked like. He could imagine what Voss's face looked like. He turned back to the Bronze Elder. Walking away from the settlement and into dragon territory, with no weapon, no armor, and no plan, was the kind of decision that sounded like madness when you described it out loud. Ethan was aware of that. He was also aware that the hatchling in his arms had stopped crying for the first time since he had heard her from 300 meters away, and that she was now breathing in slow, steady rhythms against his chest, and that whatever the Bronze Elder had said to her had settled her completely. He was aware that the dragons could have killed him the moment he crossed into the fire ring. They had not. He was aware that the Bronze Elder had spoken to the hatchling, and the hatchling had answered, and after that, the Elder had looked at him differently. Something was happening here that was bigger than a mechanic from a scrap metal settlement walking out to help an injured baby. Ethan did not understand what it was yet, but he had spent his whole life fixing things that other people had given up on, working with broken systems and damaged engines and components that everyone said were beyond saving. He had learned a long time ago that the moment something stopped making complete sense was usually the moment it started becoming something worth paying attention to. He took one long, slow breath. Then he started walking toward the ridge. The Bronze Elder moved alongside him, not in front, not behind. Alongside, matching his pace, its massive body moving with a silence that should have been impossible for something that size. The hatchling made a small sound against his chest. Ethan looked down at her, and her ocean blue eyes were open and looking up at him, and her small tail had wrapped once around his wrist without him noticing when it happened. He kept walking. Behind him, the settlement grew smaller. Ahead of him, the ridge grew larger. And above everything, the sky stretched wide and burning orange as the sun began to fall, turning the world the color of dragonfire from one horizon to the other. The other side of the ridge was nothing like Ethan expected. He had imagined something barren, something burned and broken, the way dragon territory always looked from a distance, scorched earth, cracked rock, the smell of ash over everything. That was what humans knew about the places dragons lived. That was the picture that 40 years of survival stories and settlement warnings had built in his mind. What he found on the other side of the ridge was something else entirely. The valley below was vast, wide and deep, stretching further than he could see clearly in the fading evening light, bordered on three sides by high stone walls that rose like natural towers. The floor of the valley was not burned. It was covered in low dark vegetation, something between grass and moss, deep green and silver, growing in dense patches between formations of dark rock that rose from the ground in shapes too deliberate to be completely natural. Thin streams of water ran between the rocks, catching the last of the sunlight and throwing it back in pale blue threads. And there were dragons everywhere. Not 3, not 10, dozens. Of different sizes, different colors, different ages. Some were massive, older than the Bronze Elder by the look of them, their scales dulled and layered like old bark on ancient trees. Some were younger, mid-sized, with brighter coloring and movements that were quicker and less deliberate than the Elders. A few were small enough that Ethan might have mistaken them for large dogs at a distance. Though up close, even the smallest adult dragon carried a presence that made the air around it feel charged and heavy. They were all watching him, not with aggression, not with the flat territorial stare of an animal deciding whether something is prey or threat. They watched him with something more complicated than that. They watched him the way a crowd watches something unexpected walk into a room, with stillness, with attention, with the particular quiet of many minds, all processing the same information at the same time. Ethan held the hatchling a little tighter and kept walking. The Bronze Elder led him down the valley slope along a path that was not marked by any human standard, but was clearly a path. The rock worn smooth in a line that curved between the larger formations in a way that suggested generations of use. Ethan followed it carefully, watching his footing on the uneven ground, aware of every dragon he passed, and aware that not one of them moved toward him or away from him. They simply watched. Halfway down the slope, the elder stopped. It turned its head toward a formation of rock on the right side of the path, a low, wide shelf of stone that jutted out from the valley wall about 3 feet off the ground, sheltered above by a natural overhang that kept it dry and out of the wind. The surface of the shelf was worn smooth. In the center of it, arranged in a rough circle, were several large, rounded stones that held residual warmth, the kind of warmth that comes from hours of contact with something hot. A resting place. A nest, in the most basic sense. Ethan stepped up to the shelf and crouched down slowly, lowering the hatchling from his chest toward the warm stone surface. She resisted for a moment. Her small claws found the fabric of his jacket and held, and the tail around his wrist tightened slightly, and she made a low sound that was not quite the crying sound, but was somewhere close to it in feeling. "Hey." He kept his voice low. "You're okay. Look, it's warm. It's safe." He set her down as gently as he could manage, and she released his jacket slowly, one claw at a time. Like each release was a decision she was making individually. When he finally had both hands free, he stayed crouched at the edge of the shelf and watched her settle. She turned twice on the warm stone, the way animals circle before lying down, and then lowered herself carefully, keeping her injured leg out to the side to avoid putting weight on it, and rested her chin on the stone and looked at him. He pulled off his jacket. Underneath, he was wearing a heavy cottonwork shirt, worn thin in places but still solid. He folded the jacket into a flat shape and moved it under the hatchling's body gently, giving her something softer than bare stone. She accepted it, without resistance. Her eyes were still on his face. The bronze elder had not moved from the path behind him. Ethan turned to look at it and found that several other dragons had gathered at a distance, not pressing close, staying back, but present in a way that was clearly deliberate. Among them was an elder he had not seen before, larger even than the bronze one, with scales so dark they appeared almost black in the evening light except where they caught the last sun and revealed deep violet underneath. This dragon's eyes were not gold. They were silver, pale and sharp and old in a way that made Ethan feel that the word old did not come close to covering it. The silver-eyed dragon stepped forward from the gathered group. The bronze elder lowered its head slightly as it approached, a movement so small and brief that Ethan almost missed it. But he caught it, and he understood what it meant. Whatever the bronze elder was in the structure of this group, the silver-eyed dragon was something above that. It stopped 10 feet from Ethan. For a long moment it looked at him. Then it looked at the hatchling on the rock shelf. Then it looked back at Ethan, and it made a sound that was nothing like any sound the bronze elder had made. It was layered, multiple tones at once, woven together, some of them below the range of what Ethan could hear clearly, but felt instead in his chest and the bones of his jaw. It lasted maybe 4 seconds, and when it stopped the valley was completely quiet. Then something happened that Ethan had no explanation for. His hands began to burn. Not painfully, not the sharp burning of the fire ring. This was different. It started in his palms and moved upward along his forearms in a pattern, tracing lines across his skin that he could feel clearly, the way you feel the edge of something being drawn on you. He looked down at his arms and watched lines appear on his skin, luminous gold, thin and precise, moving in patterns that curved and branched and connected in ways that looked like nothing random. They looked deliberate. They looked like language. He looked up at the silver-eyed elder. The elder's silver eyes had not moved from his face. Its expression, if a dragon could be said to have an expression, was not readable in any human way. But it was not neutral. There was intention in it. There was something being done here, something chosen and deliberate, and Ethan was not being asked for permission, because permission was not what this moment was about. The lines on his arms finished their pattern and held. They did not fade. He looked back at the hatchling on the rock shelf and found her watching him with those wide ocean eyes, her small body still and quiet, no longer in pain, no longer afraid. And she made the soft, low sound again. This time, somehow, he understood it. not the words. There were no words, but the meaning moved into him clearly, the way warmth moves into cold hands, simple and complete and impossible to misread. She had told the elders he was safe. She had told them before he ever walked down into this valley. From inside the fire ring, curled in his arms, she had already spoken for him. Everything that had happened since, the path, the nest, the gathering, the silver-eyed elder stepping forward, all of it had followed from what she said. A baby dragon had vouched for him, and the dragon elders had listened. Ethan slept in the valley that night. He had not planned to. He had not planned any of this. But by the time the silver-eyed elder had finished whatever it had done to his arms, and the last of the daylight had pulled itself below the valley walls, the path back up the ridge was dark, and the temperature had dropped sharply, and the hatchling on the rock shelf had her tail wrapped around his wrist again, and was breathing in the slow, deep rhythm of something deeply asleep. Moving felt wrong. Leaving felt wrong. So he sat with his back against the warm rock formation beside the shelf and let his eyes close and told himself he would only rest for a few minutes. He woke up to sunlight. The valley looked different in the morning. The dark vegetation caught the early light and threw it back silver, and the thin streams running between the rocks caught it gold, and the whole floor of the valley had a quality to it that Ethan had no word for, something between peaceful and ancient, the feeling of a place that had been exactly itself for longer than anything alive could measure. The hatchling was awake before him. She was sitting up on the rock shelf with her injured legs stretched out in front of her, examining it with the focused attention of someone taking inventory of damage. When she noticed Ethan was awake, she looked at him directly and made a short, decisive sound, 2 quick tones that felt in its delivery like a statement of fact. Then she looked back at her leg. Ethan sat up slowly. His back ached from the rock wall and his arms were stiff, and when he looked down at the marks running along both forearms in the morning light, they were still there, fully present, gold and precise against his skin. He ran his thumb along one of the lines carefully. It did not hurt. It did not feel raised or raw the way a burn would feel. The skin was smooth. The marks were simply part of him now, as settled as if they had always been there. He looked around the valley. Several dragons were visible at various distances, moving through their morning in ways that felt surprisingly ordinary. A large, dark-scaled one was drinking from one of the streams, lowering its massive head with the unhurried ease of something completely at home. 2 mid-sized ones were moving together along the far valley wall, their movements relaxed, not patrolling, but simply present. An elder he had not seen before was sitting completely still on a high rock outcropping above the valley floor, facing east into the rising sun, its eyes closed, its wings half open in a way that looked almost meditative. None of them were paying particular attention to Ethan. That fact settled something in his chest that he had not realized was unsettled. He had spent the night in the middle of a dragon valley and woken up, and the dragons around him were going about their mourning the same way people in Duskwall went about theirs. The parallel was strange and quiet, and it sat in his mind and did not leave. The bronze elder appeared from somewhere up the valley slope and came toward him at a pace that was calm and direct. It stopped at the edge of the rock shelf and looked at the hatchling first, a long, steady look, and the hatchling looked back and made several sounds in quick succession. The elder responded once, briefly, and then turned its attention to Ethan. It looked at his arms. Then it looked at his face. Then it did something Ethan was completely unprepared for. It lowered its entire head to the ground in front of him, not partway, all the way down, chin to the earth, eyes level with his knees, in a posture that could not be read as anything other than what it was. A bow. Ethan stood very still. He did not know how to respond to a dragon the size of a house bowing to him. He was fairly certain there was no correct human protocol for this situation. He settled for placing his right hand briefly on the top of the elder's massive head, between the ridge of scales above its eyes, lightly, the way you would acknowledge something important without making it into a performance. The elder raised its head. Something had shifted in the valley. Several of the other dragons had stopped what they were doing and were watching the rock shelf, not with the same quality of attention as the night before. This was different. This was the watching of something already decided, something confirmed, rather than something being evaluated. Ethan did not fully understand the mechanism, but he understood the feeling of it. He was no longer a stranger here. He spent the morning tending to the hatchling's leg. He had nothing with him from the settlement, no proper supplies, but the valley provided more than he expected. The dark vegetation, when broken, produced a clear fluid with a cooling quality that reduced the heat around the injured joint significantly. The warm, rounded stones near the nest shelf could be arranged to support the leg in a better position. He worked slowly and carefully, talking quietly to the hatchling as he worked. Not because she understood his words, but because the sound of a calm voice seemed to matter to her, and she let him work without resistance, watching his face the entire time with those wide, steady ocean eyes. It was late morning when he heard the sound from the ridge above. He recognized it immediately, a short repeating whistle pattern, 3 notes, pause, 3 notes. It was the settlement signal. The one the scouts used when they needed to make contact without shouting. Ethan looked up toward the ridgeline and after a moment saw a figure there, small against the sky, not moving closer, just standing at the top edge and waiting. He told the hatchling he would be back and climbed the valley slope. The figure on the ridge was a young woman named Sarah. She was one of Voss's scouts. Fast and careful, the kind of person who got sent into uncertain situations because she had the sense not to turn uncertain situations into catastrophic ones. She was standing at the exact point where the ridge dropped into the valley, not one step further, and when Ethan reached her, she looked at his arms before she looked at his face. Everyone was going to do that from now on. He was already certain of it. "You're alive." She said it flatly, the way people say things they genuinely did not expect to be true. "I'm alive." He agreed. Her eyes moved to the valley behind him, scanning, taking in what was visible from the ridgeline. Then back to him. "Voss wants you back. The whole settlement wants you back. There are people who have been on the wall since last night." "I know," Ethan said. "I'm coming back. Those marks on your arms." She said it carefully, like someone stepping onto ice they are not sure will hold. "What are they?" Ethan looked down at his forearms. In the direct morning sunlight, the gold lines were vivid and sharp, every curve and branch of the pattern fully visible from a distance. He had been trying to find words for what they were since the moment they appeared, and he still did not have the right ones. He knew what they felt like. They felt like a name written in a language older than any human tongue. They felt like a door that had been opened that was not going to be closed again. "A mark," he said finally. "The dragons gave it to me." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "The dragon elders gave a human their mark." She said it slowly, turning it over. "Yes." Voluntarily. "Yes." She was quiet for several seconds. Then she exhaled through her nose and looked back toward the settlement in the distance, and Ethan could see her working through what this meant. The same way he had been working through it, except she was doing it faster because she had to carry the news back, and he already knew what the news was going to do when it arrived. In Duskwall, news like this was not going to land softly. There were people in the settlement who had lost family to dragons, people who had watched their homes burn and their fields turn to ash, and their children grow up knowing that the sky was not safe and had never been safe and would not be safe in their lifetime. 40 years of fear and grief and survival did not dissolve because one mechanic walked into a fire ring and came out with gold marks on his arms and a baby dragon that trusted him. Some people were going to see those marks and understand them as something extraordinary. Some people were going to see them and feel something colder than that. Ethan looked back down into the valley one more time. The hatchling was visible on the rock shelf below, a small, vivid blue shape in the morning light. Even from this distance, he could tell she was watching the ridge. Watching him. He turned back toward the settlement and started walking. Duskwall looked smaller than it had the day before. Ethan noticed it the moment he came close enough to see the outer wall clearly. The settlement had not changed. The same metal scraps and old wood. the same watchtower, the same gate that needed its left hinge replaced, a job he had been putting off for 2 weeks. Nothing about Duskwall had physically changed in the time he had been gone, but something in the way he saw it had shifted, the way your eyes adjust when you have been in a very large space and then step back into a small one, and for a moment the contrast is impossible to ignore. Sarah walked beside him and said nothing. The gate opened before they reached it. Voss was standing just inside, arms crossed, jaw set in the particular expression he wore when he had spent a long time being angry and had burned through the loud part of it and was now in the quiet part, which was always worse. Behind him, spread across the open ground of the settlement interior, were people. A lot of them, not the entire settlement, but close to it. Gathered in the loose, unorganized way that crowds gather when something has happened and nobody has told them what to do about it yet. Ethan walked through the gate. The crowd went completely silent. He had expected the staring. He had prepared himself for it on the walk back. But the quality of the silence that fell over the settlement when he walked in was something he had not fully anticipated. It was not the silence of hostility. It was not the silence of a crowd building toward something ugly. It was the silence of people who were genuinely uncertain what they were looking at and were holding themselves still while they worked it out. He stopped a few feet inside the gate and stood in that silence and let them look. His arms were visible. He had pushed his sleeves back on the walk down from the ridge because covering the marks had felt dishonest, like hiding something that was not meant to be hidden. The gold lines ran from the backs of his hands up past his elbows, vivid in the morning light, precise and intricate, and unmistakably not human-made. Every person in that crowd could see them clearly. Voss spoke first. "You want to explain what those are?" It was not a question. It was the opening of an accounting. "The Dragon Elders marked me." Ethan said it clearly, loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "Last night in the valley. The silver-eyed elder. It marked me in front of the entire gathering." The silence held for another beat, and then broke into noise, multiple voices starting at once, and Voss raised one hand without looking away from Ethan, and the noise dropped back, but did not disappear completely. "Why?" Voss said. "Because I went into the fire ring, and I brought the hatchling out, and I stayed with her through the night, and I helped her leg." Ethan paused. "And because she told them to." Voss stared at him. "The hatchling told them." "Yes." "A baby dragon vouched for a human being to the Dragon Elders." "Yes." Voss was quiet for a moment. Behind him the crowd shifted and murmured and settled again. Then a voice came from somewhere in the gathered people, a man Ethan recognized, a farmer named Aldrich who had lost his brother to a dragon raid 7 years ago and had not spoken of it calmly since. "That mark is a dragon thing." Aldrich's voice was controlled, but the edges of it were not. "You're walking around wearing a dragon mark on your skin like it belongs there, like it's something good." Ethan turned toward the voice. "I'm not going to tell you it's nothing, Aldrich. It is something. I don't fully understand all of what it is yet, but I know that last night I sat in a valley full of dragons, and not one of them came at me. I know that the elder bowed its head to the ground. I know that the hatchling is alive, because someone went in and got her, and she needed that. She's a dragon," Aldrich said. "They burn our fields. They burn our people. I know what they've done." Ethan said, "I'm not standing here telling you to forget any of it. I'm telling you that something happened yesterday that has not happened in 40 years between humans and dragons. And if we decide right now that we are going to turn our backs on it because it's easier than trying to understand it, then we are choosing to keep living the way we have been living for the rest of our lives." The crowd was listening. Completely. "I'm a mechanic," he said. "I fix broken things. And I have never once fixed anything by pretending the problem wasn't there or by walking away from it because it looked too complicated. You find the damage. You understand how it happened. You figure out what it's going to take. And then you do the work." Voss had not moved through any of this. Now he looked at Ethan for a long moment, and then he looked at the crowd, and then he looked back. "What are you proposing?" Voss said. "I'm going back to the valley." Ethan said, "The hatchling needs her leg properly set, and she needs time to heal, and she trusts me to be there while that happens. And while I'm there, I'm going to learn whatever I can learn." He looked at Voss directly. "I'm not proposing anything yet. I don't have enough information to propose anything yet, but I'm going back, and I'm going to get that information, and then I'm going to bring it back here, and we're going to talk about it like people who want to survive long enough for their children to see something better than this." Nobody spoke. Voss looked at the gold marks on Ethan's arms for a long moment. Something moved behind the man's eyes, something complicated and old and tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. Then he unfolded his arms and let them drop to his sides. "Take the medical kit from the supply room," he said. "The good one. Take food for 3 days." Ethan nodded once. "Cole." Voss said it quietly as Ethan moved past him. Ethan stopped. The older man was not looking at him. He was looking at the ground just ahead of his own feet. "My daughter was 4 years old when the rift opened." He said it low, just for Ethan. "I have been angry at something in this sky every single day since then." Ethan waited. Voss looked up at the settlement wall, at the sky above it, pale morning blue and clear. "I am very tired of being angry," he said. Ethan put his hand on the man's shoulder for a moment. Then he went to get the medical kit. He left Duskwall an hour later with a bag on his back and the gold marks on his arms catching the sunlight, and the whole settlement watching from the wall in silence as he crossed the open ground toward the north ridge. At the top of the ridge he stopped and looked back once. All those small figures on the wall. 400 people who deserved something better than a life spent looking at the sky with fear. He turned back toward the valley. Somewhere below, in the morning light, a small blue hatchling was waiting on a warm stone shelf with ocean-colored eyes and a tail she had already decided belonged around his wrist. He went down to her, and that was where the real work began.